My mom uninvited me from Thanksgiving. Again, her message didn't even say sorry, just, "It's Savannah's turn this year. Hope you understand." I was 36, had just sold my company for $180 million and still felt like the kid left out in the cold. So I drove to my lakefront estate in Vermont, stared at the 12-foot oak table I'd never used, then made a decision. If my family didn't have a seat for me, I'd build a table big enough for everyone who's ever been left out. 5 days later, 32 strangers showed up for the most unforgettable Thanksgiving I've ever had. And none of them were family. I woke up before dawn, the kind of gray Vermont morning where the sky feels heavy and the air tastes of snow. My penthouse on Battery Street was still and quiet, the windows fogged from the overnight chill. I moved through the open living room, past the long oak table no one had sat at in months, toward the kitchen, where a bottle of rare single malt waited on the counter. I had picked it up 2 weeks ago in Boston, planning to bring it home to my father for Thanksgiving. My phone buzzed on the Marble Island screen, lighting up in the dimness. I reached for it with one hand while holding the bottle with the other. The message was from my mother. "This year it's just Savannah's family, hope you understand." No greeting, no explanation, just that. The bottle slipped slightly in my grip, clinking against the countertop. For a second I thought it might shatter. I set it down carefully, fingers trembling, and read the text again. The words didn't change. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since I was a boy, waiting for a ride that never came. I leaned on the counter, palms flat, staring at the bottle. My reflection wavered in the glass, hair tousled, face drawn. 36 years old, founder of a company I had sold for more money than my parents could imagine, yet still the boy on the outside, looking in. Memories rose uninvited. I was 8, sitting on the back porch of our old house in Montpelier, waiting for Mom to pick me up from soccer practice. She never came. Savannah had a piano recital and Dad had left work early to make it. I sat there until the sun dipped behind the hills, ball at my feet, the last kid at the field. Even now I could smell the wet grass and hear the buzz of the streetlights flicking on. I blinked and the kitchen came back into focus. The bottle of scotch gleamed under the recessed lights. I reached for a glass, poured a finger and sipped, even though it was barely 6 in the morning. The burn steadied me. The phone buzzed again, a notification from the bank about a dividend deposit. I swiped it away. None of it mattered right now. What I wanted was a simple chair at my family's table, a slice of turkey beside my father, a moment that felt like belonging. I picked up the phone and typed Mom. Really, this year too. My thumb hovered over send, then I deleted the words. Tried again. Understood. Deleted that too. In the end, I put the phone down, screen dark, unread message still open. Walking to the window, I pulled back the curtain. Lake Champlain stretched out below, a sheet of pewter under the pale sky. Across the water, the Adirondacks were just shadows. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned my forehead against it. Inside, the penthouse smelled of cedar and leather. I had decorated it like the magazines said successful men should. But the silence pressed in. I thought of the rare whiskey of the suit I had picked up yesterday for the trip home, of the empty seat on the plane I wouldn't be boarding. I went back to the counter and picked up the bottle. The cap slipped from my damp fingers and rolled across the marble. A splash of amber hit the counter. I grabbed a cloth and wiped it up slowly, watching the stains spread and fade. My hands moved automatically the way they had when I was a boy, cleaning up spilled juice before my father came in from the garage. I sat down at the bar stool, glass in hand, staring at the muted TV where the morning news anchors laughed about a holiday pie contest, their smiles blurred. I thought about the last time I had been home for Thanksgiving. Dad carving the turkey, Savannah's fiancé at her side, my chair pushed a little farther from the center. I had brought wine from Napa, a gift for everyone. It sat unopened on the sideboard all night. The phone lay between my elbows, black screen like a closed door. I imagined Mom in the kitchen of the old house, the smell of roasting turkey filling the air, Savannah's kids running underfoot. My name not even mentioned. I exhaled slowly, the scotch warm in my throat. I knew I should shower, get dressed, start the day. Instead, I stayed there, tracing a finger along the grain of the countertop, trying to decide if I felt anger or just a hollow ache. Outside, the first flakes of snow drifted past the window, catching in the weak light. They melted against the glass and slid down in thin lines. I watched them until they blurred together and I couldn't tell one from the other. Then I straightened, pushed the phone away, and set the glass down. The apartment was still quiet, but the silence felt heavier now, like a pause waiting for the next breath. I packed a small overnight bag without thinking much about what I threw inside. Jeans, a sweater, boots, a thermos of coffee. I left the penthouse without a note, without a message to anyone. The Range Rover started with a soft growl, and I eased out of the underground garage just as the first real snow began to stick. The drive south along the lake was quiet. A thin layer of frost clung to the trees, turning every branch into lace. The two-lane road curved through sleepy towns and wide fields gone brown with the season. The further I got from Burlington, the less I thought about the text from my mother. By the time I turned off the main road and onto the private drive that led to the estate, the lake was a sheet of still gray framed by skeletal trees and wind-blown grasses. The house rose at the edge of the property like something out of a magazine, all stone and timber with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. I had bought it the spring after we closed the acquisition deal. My company Praxis Care had been building patient analytics software for hospitals. I'd started it out of a coffee shop near Dartmouth, spent a decade fighting through setbacks, funding rounds, board meetings. The final sale had come in at $180 million. The wire had hit my account at 8:32 on a Monday morning, and by noon I was standing in the great room of this house looking out at the lake. No one in my family had said congratulations. My mother had texted, "That's nice, just be smart with it." My father never mentioned it. Savannah had posted something vague about hustle culture on Instagram. Now, almost 2 years later, the house felt like a place waiting for a purpose. I parked beside the detached garage where the classic car I'd restored sat under a tarp. The air smelled like pine and cold metal. I let myself in through the side entrance, the door creaking in the silence. Inside, the temperature was low, just above what the thermostat called eco mode. I turned on the heat, started the fireplace with the switch hidden behind a stone panel. Flames jumped to life inside the massive hearth, crackling and sending shadows across the room. The house was open concept with vaulted ceilings and exposed beam. The kitchen flowed into the living area, and beyond that stood the long dining table I'd commissioned from a local artisan. It was made of old-growth white oak, 12 feet long, polished to a soft sheen. I had never used it. I walked over and placed my hand flat on its surface. The wood was cold but smooth. I could see the faint lines of the grain, the tiny imperfections that made it feel human. I remembered the Thanksgiving when I was 10. Savannah had been away on a Girl Scouts retreat, and for the first time in years there had been a seat open beside Dad. Without asking, I had slipped into it, heart-pounding, hoping no one would tell me to move. He hadn't said anything, just passed me the mashed potatoes like it was normal. For 20 minutes I felt like I belonged, like I wasn't just the son who forgot to take the trash out or who didn't understand how to tie a tie properly. Then Mom noticed and asked if I wasn't more comfortable near the end, closer to the cousins. I had moved without a word. The memory curled in my chest like smoke. I let it pass through me, then walked over to the glass doors that opened onto the back patio. The view was unchanged even in late November. The lake shimmered behind a veil of mist, the dock reaching out like a limb into nothing. The Adirondack chairs sat empty, covered in a dusting of snow. This place had been my retreat, my reward, my monument. But in that moment it felt like a stage set waiting for actors who would never arrive. I slid open the door and stepped outside. The cold slapped my skin, but I welcomed it. Walked slowly toward the dock boots crunching on the frosted boards. At the end, I stopped and looked out. A few ducks moved near the far reeds. Across the water, a cabin chimney sent up a thread of smoke. Somewhere behind me, the house's heating system hummed to life. I stayed there for a while, just breathing, letting the cold strip away the noise in my head. Eventually, I turned back. Inside, I made coffee the old-fashioned way, using the French press I kept here. I sat at the dining table with the mug in my hands, staring across the expanse of polished wood. I imagined what it would look like, filled with people. Not family, but strangers maybe. People who knew what it meant to be left out. I wasn't sure where the idea came from, but it landed quietly as if it had always been there, just waiting to be noticed. I leaned back in the chair, the heat from the fire warming my back. The house didn't feel so empty anymore, just unfinished. I sat at the table long enough for the coffee to go cold. The idea that had crept into my mind out on the dock still lingered. It was more a feeling than a plan, but it had weight. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. I could have called anyone or no one at all, but instead I scrolled to Savannah's name. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Jules." Her voice was light, too light. She was distracted. I could hear clinking glass and faint laughter in the background. Probably at some brunch spot in Tribeca, surrounded by polished friends in beige coats and oversized sunglasses. "You got a second?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. Sort of. "We're tasting wines for Thursday. Brandon thinks the Pinot is too acidic." She gave a soft laugh like it was charming. I stared out the window at the lake. "Mom texted me this morning. Said I'm not invited." Again. There was a pause, but not long enough to mean anything. "Julian, it's not like that. You know it's just easier with fewer people this year." "I'm your brother. It's Thanksgiving." "It's not a curated guest list. Julian, don't do this right now." I leaned forward, voice low. "Be honest. You know Mom always favors you, always has, and now she's just cutting me out." Savannah sighed. "This isn't about favoring, it's just, look, you've always been a little, I don't know, intense about things." "Intense?" She hesitated. "You show up with gifts no one asks for. You correct Dad on stuff. You sit there like you're not really part of it, but then act like you should be at the center." I stood walking toward the fireplace, the phone hot in my hand. "I bring a bottle of wine because I think it'll make people happy. I correct Dad because he calls me the computer boy like I'm 12. And I sit quiet because if I say one thing wrong, Mom looks like she's been wounded." Another pause. "Julian, you'll just make everyone uncomfortable. Honestly, I think you'd hate it." I laughed once, low and bitter. I'm not sure what stunned me more, the honesty or the ease with which she said it. "Are you even hearing yourself right now?" She lowered her voice. "I'm trying to keep things smooth this year. It's our first holiday with Brandon's parents and the press stuff, and I just..." "Right. Wouldn't want me to ruin the aesthetic. That's not fair. You know what's not fair, Sav. I built something real from nothing. And no one in our family ever asked what that felt like. No one ever said they were proud, not once." She said nothing. I stopped pacing. "You think I want back in that house? I don't. I just wanted to be asked. I wanted to matter." Julian, save it. I gotta go. I hung up before she could finish. The silence that followed was deeper than before, like the house itself had gone still to listen. I stood there for a moment staring at the dead screen, my own reflection faint in the black glass. I walked outside without a coat, letting the cold slap me awake. Down at the dock, the mist had thickened. I watched it curl and twist over the water, a living thing. My breath came out in short bursts. Somewhere out on the lake, a loon called once, then again. I closed my eyes. She hadn't denied it. Not once. She hadn't said I was wrong, just that I made people uncomfortable. Just that my presence didn't match the backdrop of her perfectly staged life. Inside, the fireplace snapped. I turned back toward the house. The decision formed quietly, but once it settled, it felt solid. I wasn't going back to Burlington. I wasn't chasing a seat at their table. If they thought I didn't fit their story, fine. I'd write a new one. One where the people at the table didn't care what wine you brought or who approved of your tone. One where nobody needed to prove they belonged. The house was no longer unfinished. It was about to be used exactly the way I should have used it all along. I built a fire and sat on the rug in front of the hearth. Knees up, glass of bourbon in my hands. The flames cracked against the stone and the smell of oak filled the room. Outside, the mist on Lake Champlain had turned silver as the sun edged higher. I stared at it until the shapes blurred my mind, moving faster than my eyes could follow. If they had no place for me, then I would make a place for someone else. The thought arrived quiet but clear, like a key turning in a lock. I had spent years building things from nothing. This would be no different. I stood, walked into the kitchen, and set the glass down. My laptop sat on the counter where I had left it. I opened it, fingers moving automatically to wake it up. The last emails were from investors and my accountant. I pushed them aside and opened my contacts. Eva Monroe's name blinked at me. She was the daughter of Clara, the painter who lived up the road. 2 winters ago, I had helped Clara patch her roof after an ice storm tore shingles loose. Eva had been there that day, boots in the snow, clipboard in hand. Organizing volunteers, she worked as an event coordinator for a hotel in town, the kind of person who could make a wedding happen on 3 days' notice. I tapped her number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice brisk and warm at the same time. Julian, hi. This is a surprise. Eva, I need some help. With what? I want to host Thanksgiving here. Big, like really big. How big is big? 32 people, maybe more. I want the table set outside if the weather holds, inside if not. 5 days from now. She laughed, quick and incredulous. Julian, Thanksgiving is in 5 days. You know that, right? I know. Can you do it? She was silent for a beat. You're serious. I'm serious. Another pause, then a soft exhale. Okay. But who are these 32 people? Not family, people who don't have anywhere to go, people who are tired of being left out. Her voice softened. That's actually kind of beautiful. Can you handle it? I can handle logistics. I just need a budget. I opened my banking app, transferred a deposit to her business account. Done. I'll send you the floor plan. Wait, I'm checking. She paused, then whistled low. Okay, you're not kidding. I'm not. I'll cover food, staff, rentals. I just need you to pull it together. She chuckled. You really are something, Julian. I'll get started. Send me a list of what you already have at the estate. Tables, chairs, linens, and I'll call around for the rest. We'll need heaters if you want it outside. Order them, whatever you think. She hesitated. I think my mom will want to help too. She's been kind of lonely since the gallery closed. Tell her she's invited. Everyone who wants to help is invited. Okay, I'll call you tonight with a plan. I ended the call and set the phone down, the room suddenly brighter. For the next hour, I walked through the house making notes. The long dining table in the great room, the patio big enough for a tent, the kitchen's double ovens. I wrote down everything and sent it to Eva with a picture of the back lawn sloping down to the dock. While the phone uploaded the images, I stood at the window. The mist was lifting. Sunlight spilled across the lake in shards. In the distance, a fisherman's boat left a faint wake. I poured another inch of bourbon but didn't drink it. Just held it while I imagined the house full. Strangers talking, laughing, the long oak table finally used for what it was meant. Plates passed from hand to hand. Music. A warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. The phone buzzed with Eva's reply. On it, already called the rental company. She had attached a sketch of the layout chairs lined up in even rows, heaters at each end. A buffet along the window wall. I smiled despite myself. For the first time in days, something like anticipation stirred in my chest. I walked back outside. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Standing on the dock, I imagined strings of lights hanging from the beams, the sound of voices drifting over the water. It was still hard to picture the details, but the feeling was there, steady and growing. Behind me, the fire burned steadily. I turned back toward the house, hands in my pockets, and felt the quiet start to shift from empty to expectant. The next morning, Ava showed up in her beat-up Subaru with a folder stuffed full of printed notes and a coffee in each hand. She didn't even knock, just came through the side door like she belonged there. Which I guess she did now. "Morning, boss," she said, setting the coffees on the kitchen island. "I brought the list. We're gonna need to narrow it down." I took one of the cups and nodded toward the living room. We sat on the couch in front of the fire and she spread the papers across the coffee table. I reached for the first profile. A guy named Tyrell Jennings, 64. Former Marine. Lost his wife 5 years ago, lives in a trailer on the outskirts of town, no kids, no nearby family. He's been doing Thanksgiving at the diner by himself for the past few years. Eva said. The waitress there says he always leaves early, never finishes the pie. Next was Nina Tran, single mom, mid-30s, works 2 jobs. Her daughter goes to school with Eva's niece. They're staying in a motel since the fire in their building. She was going to spend the holiday working a double at the pharmacy, and she's still coming. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. One by one, we went through the names. A college student from Michigan who couldn't afford a flight home. A recently widowed retiree. A dishwasher who lived in his car. None of them had asked for this, but every single one of them said yes. By noon, we had 32 names. Some Eva had reached out to directly, others had come through Clara's church group or the community board at the co-op. Each one had a reason. Each one had a story. I leaned back on the couch, overwhelmed by how much loneliness had been hiding in plain sight. "I didn't expect to feel this," human Eva said quietly. "Yeah." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My dad left when I was 10. First Thanksgiving without him, Mom made a turkey and pretended nothing had changed. But the table felt different, always did after that." I looked at her, not sure what to say, but thankful she shared it. The doorbell rang. Clara came in with a crate of table linens and a thermos of soup. I told her she didn't have to bring anything. She waved me off. I brought chicken and barley. "You two haven't eaten, have you?" She stayed for lunch, telling stories about the time she hosted 12 artists in her backyard for Thanksgiving. No one brought utensils. They used paintbrushes as chopsticks. That afternoon, Eva and I drove into town to drop off handwritten invitations. I watched her knock on doors, hug people, make small jokes that made them laugh even when their eyes looked tired. At one stop, Tyrell opened the door wearing a thick flannel and a veteran's cap. He studied the invite in his hand, brows low. "What's all this for?" he asked. "We're putting together a community dinner," I said. "Just folks who could use a place to sit for the holiday." He squinted at me. "You're that tech guy." I smiled. "Guilty." He looked down at the paper again. 7 years, he said. "I've eaten Thanksgiving alone 7 years in a row." He didn't say it like he was sad, just like it was a fact. "This year you'll have the head of the table," I told him. He blinked slowly, then nodded once. "Guess I better find a shirt without holes in it." Back at the house, Eva updated the seating chart and I lit the fire again. Clara was in the kitchen polishing silverware. I watched them work, the two of them moving in sync as if they had done this every year. I poured a small glass of bourbon and stepped out onto the back patio. The lake reflected the last of the sunset copper and gray and gold. 32 names, 32 stories. I hadn't set out to become anyone's host. But as I stood there listening to the faint laughter from inside, I realized something had already shifted. I wasn't just making space, I was building something new. Eva showed up just after 9 with her sleeves rolled and a box of sketches under her arm. She had that focused look on her face, the kind that meant she was about to throw me into a whirlwind of logistics. "I brought someone," she said, stepping aside. Behind her stood a tall man with dark hair, a canvas messenger bag slung across his chest, and a clipboard in one hand. He looked around, once nodded slightly. "Julian, this is Mason Cole. He's a local architect. He just came off a vineyard renovation in Shelburne. Thought he might be able to help with the layout." "Mason," he extended his hand. "Julian, heard about the project. Eva said you needed help fast." We shook. His grip was firm, professional, but there was something behind his eyes, like he was trying to place me. We stepped outside to the back lawn. Mason walked slow, scanning the terrain, the slope toward the dock, the trees lining the edges like a natural frame. "Plenty of potential here," he said. "You want a formal structure or something more open?" "Open, casual, but thoughtful. Enough cover if it snows, but I want people to feel like they're part of the lake." He nodded, jotting something on his clipboard. I watched him work for a few minutes. He moved like someone who'd done this before, measuring with his eyes, adjusting angles with the tip of his boot. "You been in Vermont long?" I asked. "Off and on. Lived here full-time the last 3 years? Your name sounds familiar." He looked up. "I went to Dartmouth, class of '08. That clicked. My sister went there too. Savannah Hayes." His eyes changed, just a flicker barely visible unless you were looking. "Yeah, I remember." I tilted my head slightly. "You two dated, didn't you?" "For a little while," he said. Eva glanced between us, sensing the shift. I stepped closer to Mason as we walked toward the dock. "She didn't mention you much," I said. He gave a short laugh. "She probably didn't mention a lot of things." I waited. Sometimes silence did more than pressure. We were together our senior year. Thought it might go somewhere. But then she got introduced to Brandon Wolfe at a fundraiser. A week later, she was done with me. He said it without bitterness, more like he was reading back a note he'd memorized. "She told me my family didn't fit the brand she was building. Said her parents had always had a vision for who she'd end up with. Brandon fit. I didn't." I exhaled through my nose, not surprised, but still stung. "Yeah, sounds familiar." He looked at me, then really looked. "So it's not just me, not even close." We stood at the edge of the dock. The lake stretched out, quiet and still. "Funny," he said. "You build a life you're proud of, think maybe it's finally enough. Then you realize they were never looking to be proud in the first place. Just looking to confirm the picture they already had in their heads." He nodded slowly. Eva called from the lawn, asking for measurements for tent stakes. Mason jogged back to her and I followed. The rest of the morning passed in a quiet rhythm. Mason sketched elevations. Eva texted rental companies. I helped haul crates from the garage, but under the surface something had shifted. Not quite friendship, not yet, but a kind of recognition. The quiet alliance that forms between people who've been excluded from the same story. When Mason packed up for the day, he gave me a firm nod. I'll be back tomorrow with the layout. We'll make this place shine. Looking forward to it. He paused, then added, I'm glad you're doing this. So am I. The door closed behind him, and I stood there for a long moment. Not alone. Not this year. The tent arrived on a flatbed truck just after dawn, bundled in massive canvas rolls and steel poles that clanged against each other as they were unloaded. I stood on the back lawn with a cup of coffee, watching the crew begin to assemble it. Frost still clung to the grass. The sky above the lake was pale blue, streaked with amber. Mason showed up in a thermal jacket and knit cap blueprint tucked under one arm, hands already stained with marker. Eva arrived minutes later with 2 folding tables strapped to the roof of her car and Clara in the passenger seat holding a tin of cookies. We set up in a rhythm. Mason directed the crew, measuring stake distances, adjusting the slope. Eva walked the perimeter with her phone flashlight, testing the amber string lights she'd sourced from a wedding rental house in Bar. Clara polished candle holders on the porch and hummed a hymn I didn't recognize. I helped carry in folding chairs, moved patio heaters into position, wiped down the long oak table with a cloth that came away streaked with dust. I watched as they assembled smaller tables into one continuous stretch, then draped it in layered linen. The whole thing started to take shape like something sacred. At one point, Mason asked for help stabilizing the anchor ropes. I knelt beside him in the cold dirt, our gloved hands moving in sync. Never thought I'd be lashing down tent lines before Thanksgiving, he muttered. You've done stranger things for less, I bet. Fair point. Eva emerged from the garage holding an old lantern I had forgotten I owned. When lit, it cast a warm golden glow that made the canvas walls look like they belonged in a film set. We took a break near midday. Clara brought out sandwiches and poured cider into ceramic mugs. We sat on overturned crates in the crisp air, watching the tent ripple gently in the wind. I looked around at them. These people hadn't asked for anything. They came because they believed in something I didn't know I'd been building. When I was a kid, I said aloud, I used to think if I behaved well enough, someone would save me a seat. Now I get it. You don't wait for the invitation, you build the table yourself. Eva glanced at me, eyes warm. And then you make sure there's room for others. I nodded slowly. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out. It was my mother. I stepped away from the tent down the gravel path toward the dock before answering. Julian, her voice was clipped. I wanted to ask about the Fortis Fund. You were handling that last quarter, weren't you? Hi, Mom. I'm fine, thanks for asking. She didn't respond to that. We just got the Q3 report and there are some capital gains I don't recognize. I looked out at the lake. The sun was higher now, reflecting sharp and clear. I'm not managing your portfolio anymore. I handed it off to your advisor in July. Oh. She paused, clearly annoyed. You could have told me. I sent an email. Another pause. Well, that was it. No curiosity, no mention of the holiday, not even a perfunctory question about how I was doing. I could feel the old reflex kicking in, the one that used to make me defend myself or scramble to explain. This time I didn't. I'm busy right now, I said simply. Doing what? Building something. There was a click as she ended the call. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I wasn't angry. I didn't even feel numb, just still. I walked back up to the house. Eva and Mason were stringing lights along the edge of the porch. Clara waved me over to help her unpack ceramic plates wrapped in tissue. The table was half set now, napkins folded in the center of each place setting. Name cards handwritten in Eva's looping script, the sun dipped lower casting gold across the glass windows. It was coming together. And so was I. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a silver chill in the air and a pale sun rising low over Lake Champlain. The grass still held the frost from overnight and the tented lawn looked like something from a dream. The heaters hummed softly, warming the space beneath the canvas where the long table waited, every setting in place. I dressed in a soft wool sweater, dark jeans and boots. Nothing flashy, just warm, just grounded. By noon, the first guests started arriving. I greeted each one at the door, smiling, holding the door open like it was the most natural thing in the world. Some came alone, others in pairs. A few looked nervous. Most looked unsure. I understood that look. Nina Tran arrived with her daughter Lily, clutching a small bouquet of paper flowers she had made from old magazines. Tyrell Jennings wore a navy blazer with a missing button and brought a loaf of cornbread wrapped in foil. I shook his hand and told him his seat was waiting. He smiled, slow and grateful. A college student named Marcus walked in, hands in his pockets, shoulders drawn up like armor. He looked around and whispered, "I thought I'd be the only one like me." I told him, "You're not." Each time the door opened, I saw more than a guest. I saw someone showing up despite the ache, despite the history, despite the fear that maybe this was a mistake. I knew that feeling. I'd lived in it for years, inside the soft strum of acoustic guitar played through hidden speakers. Eva had chosen the playlist. Warm, low rhythms, nothing too sentimental, just enough to settle nerves. Clara floated between guests, offering cider and telling everyone they looked wonderful. Mason lit candles along the table, each flame catching the golden reflections in the glassware. Conversation started slow, tentative. Someone commented on the view, someone else on the smell of roasted turkey drifting in from the kitchen. Eva directed volunteers with practiced ease. She moved like she belonged in a room full of people finding home in each other. I poured wine, moved from person to person, clinking glasses lightly, asking where they were from, what brought them here. Some told me, some just nodded, grateful not to be asked for anything more. There was a rhythm to the evening that built quietly. People began to laugh. Bread was passed around, seconds were requested. Someone started humming along to the music, and before long there was a conversation stretching the length of the table. About old songs, about weather, about nothing and everything. I stood near the head of the table for a moment, just watching. The faces were unfamiliar, but the feeling was not. This was the dinner I had dreamed of since I was a boy. Not the setting, not the food, the connection. The simple miracle of being seen and wanted without conditions. Across the room, a woman pulled out her phone and angled it toward the glowing table. She was local, a journalist from a small lifestyle magazine in Burlington. I hadn't invited her because of that. I didn't even know until Eva told me. She had just lost her sister and wasn't up for family gatherings. Eva said you should come. And she had. She took a few discreet photos, her face soft in the candlelight. I caught her eye and nodded. She mouthed, "Thank you." I didn't know she would post the photo that night. I didn't know it would go viral by morning. All I knew then was that 32 strangers had walked into my house and brought with them a warmth I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. Not pity, not charity, something else. They weren't just guests, they were part of the table I had built, and as the sky outside deepened into dusk and laughter echoed under the tent, I realized this was not the end of something. It was the beginning. Dinner was winding into that perfect rhythm between second helpings and stories. The candles had burned low but steady. The room felt suspended in warmth and something unspoken. Tyrell stood up slowly, holding his glass with both hands. Everyone quieted without being asked. "I just want to say one thing," he said, his voice gravelly but clear. "This is the first Thanksgiving I haven't spent alone in 7 years." Silence settled. Not awkward, not heavy, just full. He glanced around the table, then gave a small nod. "Thank you." Someone clapped, then another. And then it was all of us, a round of quiet, genuine applause that felt like a heartbeat shared. A student named Olivia wiped her eyes and reached for the hand of the older woman beside her. "I didn't even know how much I needed this," she whispered. Across the table, Clara stood with a piece of paper in her hand. She unfolded it with care. "I'd like to read something, if that's all right." She cleared her throat and began. "Some houses have no doors," she read, "but they have windows wide enough for welcome. Some tables stretch to fit the ones who come last and leave room for the ones who almost didn't come at all." It wasn't long, but when she finished, there wasn't a dry eye at the table. I sat there, surrounded by 32 stories, 32 souls who had in some way said yes to being seen. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in the center of something, not because of what I had built or did or succeeded at. I was here because I had made space. Mason reached for this guitar resting on the bench behind him. He started playing something soft, unassuming, a melody that felt like warm wood and open windows. Someone hummed. Someone else tapped the table in rhythm. Nina smiled at her daughter, who was giggling quietly into her sleeve. Nina caught my eye. "She's been so quiet since the fire," she said, "since her dad. But today she laughed in the car. She sang in the shower." "That hasn't happened in 3 years." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. The lights from the tent glowed like a halo around us. The smell of cider and rosemary and wood smoke filled the air. This wasn't a dinner. It was something closer to grace. Eva leaned over. "You all right?" "I think I've never been more all right," I said. And I meant it. The door to the kitchen swung open and Clara came out with a pie that smelled like cinnamon and brown sugar. A murmur of delight rippled across the room. We passed plates. We passed story. And in that moment, every version of me that had ever waited outside a door hoping to be let in finally took a seat across the river in Manhattan, high above the city, in a penthouse that cost more than most people's lifetime earnings. Savannah stood beside a marble bar holding a glass of champagne she hadn't sipped. The party swirled around her in glitter and soft jazz and curated conversation. Brandon was in the middle of a story about their upcoming engagement announcement when someone tapped Savannah on the shoulder and held out a phone. It was Sierra, her college friend turned lifestyle influencer. "Is this your brother?" she asked, showing the screen. Savannah frowned and leaned closer. The photo showed a glowing tent, a long table filled with smiling faces, candlelight, and Julian standing at the head mid-laugh. There were already thousands of likes. The caption read, "Local entrepreneur hosts Thanksgiving for 32 strangers in Lakefront estate and shares a message of belonging over perfection." Savannah stiffened. "That's Julian, isn't it?" Sierra said, scrolling down. "Oh my God, is that Mason Cole?" Brandon came up beside her, his tone light. "What's this?" She turned the screen toward him without a word. His eyebrows lifted. "He's doing PR now." Savannah ignored him. Someone behind them whispered, "That's your brother." Later that night, Diane Hayes sat in her kitchen in the Upper West Side, a glass of wine beside her, her laptop open. An email from a colleague blinked in bold. "Saw this online. Is that your son?" The attached link was the same article now picked up by a regional news site. She clicked through the gallery. The photos showed Julian smiling guests, laughing people, hugging in the cold Vermont air. She stared at the screen for a long time before shutting the laptop. Upstairs, Savannah paced her bedroom with her phone pressed to her ear. "I didn't think he'd make a spectacle of it," she said. "He didn't make a spectacle," Diane replied. "He made a point." Savannah's voice tightened. "You're taking his side now. I'm just saying he found a way to be seen," Savannah scoffed. "He was always dramatic. He could have just come to dinner. He wasn't invited. It was Brandon's year. The guest list was tight. He's your brother." Savannah didn't reply. Back in Vermont, I was clearing plates when my phone buzzed. A single text from Mom. "Tron con ban ron ni. Hope you're well." I stared at the message, no punctuation beyond the period, no warmth, not even a question mark. I put the phone face down on the table. Behind me, Eva was laughing with Clara. Tyrell was showing Marcus a photo of his dog. Mason was tuning the guitar again quietly in the corner. There was a time that message would have undone me. Now it just sounded like static. I looked around the room and let it fade. The last car had pulled away. The tent lights were dimmed. The lawn was quiet again, but not empty. Inside, the long table bore the evidence of a night lived fully. Half-folded napkins, wax dripped down candle holders, crumbs scattered like punctuation marks at the end of stories. I moved slowly through the room, collecting empty glasses, straightening chairs. Eva stood at the sink, rinsing platters, while Clara hummed a tune and wrapped leftovers in foil. Mason hauled in folding chairs from outside, breath clouding in the night air. We worked in unspoken rhythm like we had rehearsed this ending. No rush, no sadness, just the soft echo of something good having happened. Eva turned to me, her hands still damp from the dishwater. "Thank you, Julian, for this. For my mom. I haven't seen her like that in years." She looked younger tonight, happier. I nodded. She brought something none of us could have. I should be the one thanking her. Eva smiled, then leaned down to kiss her mom's forehead before heading out to warm up the car. Mason stayed behind. He set 2 tumblers on the table and pulled out a familiar bottle of bourbon. "You look like you need this more than I do," he said. We sat on the floor by the fireplace, backs against the stone, the flames crackling low. He poured carefully and handed me a glass. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the message again. "Hope you're well." I stared at it. Still no reply. Still no urge to respond. I set the phone face down on the hardwood. Mason raised his glass. "To new traditions," he said. I clinked mine against his. "And to the people who show up." We drank in silence for a minute, the warmth of the bourbon sinking deeper than I expected. "You know," Mason said after a beat, "Savannah told me once she wasn't sure she made the right choice with Brandon." I looked over. "Really?" "Yeah. It was years ago. We ran into each other at a gallery thing. She said something like it wasn't about love, it was about optics. She needed to make Mom and Dad proud." He checked all the boxes. I nodded slowly. That sounded like her, like all of us once. "She said you were always the one who scared them," Mason added. "Scared them, yeah. Because you didn't need them to tell you who to be. That's threatening, apparently." I laughed. A soft, real sound. I used to think I had to prove something. To them, to her, to myself. And now I think I just needed to give what I never got. That feels like enough." He nodded. "That's rare, knowing when you've crossed your own finish line." We sat a while longer, watching the last embers flicker down. Somewhere upstairs, Clara was turning off lights. Outside, the lake moved in the dark, soft and endless. I looked into the fire and saw a version of myself I hadn't known existed. Not smaller, not angry, just at peace. Tomorrow the tent would come down. The dishes would be packed away. The world would turn back to normal. But something in me had shifted for good, and I didn't need anyone to notice for it to be real. The snow had been falling since early morning, a soft and steady hush that covered everything in a blanket of quiet. The lake was half frozen now, the surface brushed in white like sugar on glass. The pine trees along the ridge wore their coats proudly. From inside the house, the smell of cinnamon and cloves drifted into every corner. I was hanging string lights across the beams in the great room when Mason walked in holding a box of ornaments. "They're older than I am," he said, setting them on the table. "My mom used to hang them up with fishing wire so the cat wouldn't knock them down." We both laughed. Eva appeared a few minutes later with folded napkins embroidered with gold thread. "Gingerbread?" she asked, lifting the cloth off a tray. I made them look like tiny cabins. Clara arrived just before dusk, arms full of greenery she had clipped from her yard. She kissed me on the cheek and told me the cider smelled like December. Tyrell came with a wrapped package and a grin. Nina brought deviled eggs and her daughter wore a Santa hat 2 sizes too big. The long table stood in the same place as before, but this time it held pine cones and garlands between the plates. Little red berries tucked into folds of napkins. There was a fir tree in the corner, lights blinking slow and gentle. Outside, a wreath hung on the front door and lanterns glowed in the windows. As guests filtered in, coats were shrugged off, boots traded for slippers. Stories resumed like bookmarks picked up from a month ago. Mason and I adjusted chairs while Eva arranged place cards. They weren't names written in gold ink this time, just simple handwritten notes folded with care. But everyone smiled when they found their spot. We sat down just as the snow deepened and the sky turned that impossible winter blue. No speeches this time, no fanfare, just forks meeting plates and laughter rising like steam. Across the table, Clara leaned in. "I told my sister about Thanksgiving. She's doing something similar this year in Ohio." Eva smiled. "Looks like you started something." I met her eyes and nodded. I didn't build a family the way I thought I would. Not through marriage, not through blood, but this table, this group, this warmth that filled every inch of this house. It felt more permanent than any legacy money could buy. I used to think I needed to belong to something that came before me. Now I know I can belong to something I help build. We cleared dishes slowly after dessert. The fire crackled. The wind outside rattled a branch against the window, soft and regular. Later, when most of the guests had left and the lights were dimmed low, I stepped out onto the back deck. Snow covered the dock and the railing. The lake was still except for the wind brushing over its frozen edge. From inside, the warm glow of the dining room spilled through the glass, casting long shadows across the snow. I stood there, hands in my pockets, breath clouding in front of me. I wasn't born into the right family, but I found the right people, and sometimes that's enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt like you didn't have a seat at the table, maybe it's time to build one of your own. Like what you heard, give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories just like this one.